So it's a bit of a one-off this morning. We're back in Luke's Gospel, where if you've been in the church for a while, we were in for a while, but it's a bit of a one-off. I had a Sunday off last week and went to another church and he preached on this passage. So I haven't stolen his sermon, honest. But when the reading was read, there was one particular verse that as it was read, I just knew I had to preach on this passage this morning. And so we are returning to Luke, and Luke chapter 7. And the passage I want to look at starts at verse 36. We're going to take a bit of context and go back into verse 18, I think. Yeah, verse 18. So Luke chapter 7, verse 18. Children, there's no children's talk this morning. That's because you're all staying in. And so I thought let's get them to listen to one talk, or at least aim for them to listen to one talk rather than two. And when we're thinking about that talk, I really want you to be thinking of one of the baddest people you could think of. Think of someone that you really don't want to talk to. Think about someone perhaps who'd be really embarrassing to talk to. Perhaps if you're in school or a family occasion and someone walked over to you and everybody saw that they were talking to you. Who would you hate that to be? Someone coming close, someone coming near, someone looking like they were your friend. Perhaps it's someone in school that you don't like. Perhaps it's a person in the news or in society or even in history that is a horrible or a terrible person that you wouldn't want to come near you. Have a think, and we'll read this passage together. Luke chapter 7, starting from verse 18. The disciples of John reported all these things to him, and John, calling two of his disciples to him, sent them to the Lord, saying, "Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?" And when the men had come to him, they said, "John the Baptist has sent us to you, saying, 'Are you the one who is to come, or shall we look for another?'" In that hour he healed many people of diseases and plagues and evil spirits, and on many who were blind he bestowed sight. And he answered them, "Go and tell John what you have seen and heard. The blind receive their sight, the lame walk, lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead are raised up, the poor have good news preached to them. And blessed is the one who is not offended by me." When John's messengers and to speak to the crowds concerning John, "What did you go out into the wilderness to see? A reed shaken by the wind? What then did you go out to see? A man dressed in soft clothing? Behold, those who are dressed in splendid clothing and live in luxury are in king's courts. What then did you go out to see? A prophet? Yes, I tell you, and more than a prophet. This is he of whom it is written, 'Behold, I send my messenger before your face, who will prepare your way before you.' I tell you, among those born of women, none is greater than John. Yet the one who is least in the kingdom of God is greater than he." When all the people heard this, and the tax collectors too, they declared God just, having been baptized with the baptism of John. But the Pharisees and the lawyers rejected the purpose of God for themselves, not having been baptized by him. To what then shall I compare the people of this generation? And what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. "We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We sang a dirge, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, 'Look at him, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners.' Yet wisdom is justified by all her children." One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and reclined at the table. And behold, a woman of the city who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. Standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears, and wiped them with the hair of her head, and kissed his feet, and anointed them with the ointment. When the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, "If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him, for she is a sinner." And Jesus answering said to him, "Simon, I have something to say to you." And he answered, "Say it, teacher." A certain moneylender had 2 debtors. One owed 500 denarii and the other 50. When they could not pay, he cancelled the debt of both. Now which of them will love him more? Simon answered, the one, I suppose, for whom he cancelled the larger debt. And he said to him, you have judged rightly. Then turning toward the woman, he said to Simon, do you see this woman? I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet, but she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. You gave me no kiss. But from this time I came in, she has not ceased to kiss my feet. You did not anoint my head with oil, but she has anointed my feet with ointment. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who is forgiven little loves little. And he said to her, your sins are forgiven. Then those who were at the table with him began to say among themselves, who is this, who even forgives sins? And he said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. This is the word of the Lord. So please turn back to Luke chapter 7. If you've got one of these, that might help you get through the sermon, give you a bit of a structure, a bit of an outline. Children, I hope you've got that person in your mind that you should have been thinking about, that person that you wouldn't want to be seen with, you wouldn't want talking to you. I wonder when was the last time you went to see the doctor and how that went. Always strikes me that doctors like asking questions. My dad was a doctor. He never asked me any questions about my health. He always seemed to sort of brush me away. But I'm sure when he was doing his job with a real patient, he asked lots of questions. They ask you things like, when did you first start to feel like this? They prod around and ask, does this hurt? They might ask you about your eating and your exercise. They might ask about certain medications. A doctor's nosy. Why are they asking so many questions? They're asking questions so they can gain information and get a full picture of your health. They want to diagnose properly. They want to fix properly. And so they want to understand a full picture. Luke, who wrote the book that we are looking at this morning, that we read from earlier, Luke was a doctor. And you can sort of hear it. You can sort of see it when you read his book. Luke likes details. Luke tells us he's gone out to eyewitnesses and he's asked lots of questions. He's asked lots of questions so he can give you a good and orderly account. He can give you an account of what really happened on this day. When this lady came and met Jesus, he wants you to be fixed and sure and certain about the events that happened. So he's really good with the details. He's focused on the details. I think if Luke hadn't been a doctor, he might have been a chef. Because Luke also seems to really like meals. He's always telling us about food. He's always telling us about meals that Jesus is having, who he's sitting down with, what he's spending time doing. Often in the book we find Jesus eating and sharing meals with all sorts of people. Perhaps people we wouldn't want to have a meal with. Jesus is having a meal with them. Perhaps people who are shocking and surprising to have food with. Jesus is sitting down and he's starting to get a bit of a reputation. That was in the reading. Did you hear it? Jesus' enemies are calling him a glutton and a drunkard. If you don't know what that means you're eating so much food, it's evil. Just you're a little bit greedy, it's evil. The amount of food you're eating is evil and wicked. And a drunkard. Not that you're having a little bit of alcohol, not you're having alcohol in moderation, but you're drinking so much alcohol you're out of control. It's out of moderation. You're taking a good gift from God and you're abusing it. And that's what they're saying about Jesus. They're saying that because they could see him in these places with these sorts of people all of the time. Our account today came from Luke's description of one of these meals. Jesus has been invited to the house of a Pharisee, a chap called Simon. And the Pharisee is a regular bad guy in the Gospels, isn't he? If you've grown up in church, if you're a young person who's been to church a lot and you're hearing the word Pharisee, you think, boo. That's the bad guy. We know in the story that they're the bad guys. In the end, they get their way and Jesus gets nailed to a cross. So when a Pharisee turns up, we think we don't like them very much. But that wouldn't have been the case in Jesus' day. People wouldn't have gone around going, don't like that guy. They would have respected them. They were religious leaders. So sometimes when people are doing talks like this and they try and explain a Pharisee, they point to people like me. People who are full-time Christians. People who are paid to teach the Bible. Because Pharisees were sort of full-time religious leaders. There's a difference. Oh, I lost the mic. Tony's had enough. I can shout. Should I shout? Okay. So they weren't just religious leaders. Can you hear me in the back, Ruth? Yes. Well, Reese can. Just about. There's seats at the... So they weren't just religious leaders. They were religious leaders in a religious society. So that meant when they said something, people listened. Tried it in my street, it doesn't work. Said all sorts of things, no one listened. When society, so there's not that respect for a religious leader anymore. So you need to think a little bit, who are the respected leaders in our society? Who is listened to? I've had a little think. Who are the influencers? That's a popular word at the minute, isn't it? So you could say, politically, there's power in someone like Rishi Sunak. He's got power, he's got influence in the decisions that he makes. He's Prime Minister of this country. Or you may say Mark Drakeford here in Wales has influence, has power. You might go for a journalist. I couldn't think of any influential journalists, probably because I'm ignorant. But you could go for a journalist, someone who's writing and has a large readership. People who are listening to their opinions, following them. They go to the pub or to the post office and they report what that journalist is saying like it's their own opinion. They've been influenced. This is what I think about Russia and Ukraine. This is what I think about politics. Or perhaps for the youngsters in the room, it's someone like Mr. Beast, some YouTuber, someone who's got an amazing influence because of the sheer number of people that tune in and listen to what they've got to say. And so when you're thinking about an influencer, when you're thinking about a Pharisee, you're thinking about someone whose opinion counts. What they think, other people think. What they do, people try and replicate. Speak and people listen. So it's that sort of house that Jesus has gone to. It's a bit like going to Mr. Beast's house. It's a bit like going to Rishi Sunak's house. It's a house of influence. It's a house of importance. It's a big invitation. And Jesus is invited to that house for tea. It's not the house of a nobody. It's the house of a somebody. So Jesus walks in and he takes his seat. That's the scene. We're in a room, probably quite a nice room, probably quite a nice house. It might open out onto the street because the lady who's about to walk in just seems to be able to walk in. Might have something of a courtyard with a table around it. What I want to describe, though, and what I think Luke describes to us, is a human room. What we enter, what we walk into with Luke, is a very human room. And what I mean by that is, I mean it's a room we should all be able to relate to. We've all been in similar places. We've been in rooms like this one with other humans involved, and we're all doing human things while we're in that room. There might be some cultural differences between this room, or our living room, and Simon's living room, but generally they're like any gathering that we've been to. There's a guest list. There's those people who are invited, those people who are supposed to be there, those people who know what they're doing in that space and know what they're doing in that room. And then there's outsiders, people who don't fit in, people who don't belong. And one particular outsider, she walks right into the room. She's well known. And she's well known for all the wrong reasons. Children, she's the reason I was asking you to think of the worst person. The person you wouldn't want to be seen with. The person you don't want coming up to you in class or school. You can imagine the stares and the whispers. What is she doing here? Am I allowed to whisper? Have I got a microphone now? Or am I still shouting? What is she doing here? Who does she think she is? A woman like that can't come into a house like this. A woman like that can't go near a man like Jesus. It's one of the reasons that I called it a human room, because people are acting like they always do. judging, comparing themselves to others, looking down on people who are easy to look down on from their position of self-elevated status. Luke lets us know something of who she is, tells us something of her reputation. Luke doesn't give us the details, but we can sort of work out what type of woman she is. This happens everywhere, doesn't it? Happens in the restaurant, in the bus queue, in the classroom. Someone walks in and they don't fit. Either what they're wearing or their reputation, they don't fit. And so we make a quick assumption, they shouldn't be in here. We turn away or we look away from them with our eyes. We find it easy to distance ourselves from them. A new child comes into the classroom and we look them up and down, and then we look at one another, weigh up whether they're friend material or not. Often outsiders like this will act quietly. They'll sit at the edge of a room. They'll stay at the back. They'll wait to be invited in. They'll be nervous. But not this lady. She's got a mission in mind. She's there with a purpose. She's not just sneaking into a party, a gathering. She's there for a reason, and she goes straight on with that reason. She heads straight towards Jesus. That's the only reason she's there. She heard Jesus was going to be in this room, so she goes. She heads straight for him, straight for the guest of honor. No dignity, no tact, no etiquette. It's even more shocking, as Luke tells us, she's a sinner. Everyone knows the type of woman that she is, and everyone wants to keep their distance from her. And rather than keeping her distance, she's gone right to the guest of honor. Luke, with his description, helps us picture the room. The sounds of voices were chattering, getting to know one another, bits of small talk, and they're now replaced. The sound that everyone can hear is this lady weeping. That's going to make you feel awkward, isn't it? You're at a party, and there is someone in the middle of the room weeping. The smell was of prepared food spread across the table, but that smell, that pleasant smell, is now being replaced with a pungent perfume. She's cracked open this jar and she's pouring this ointment, this expensive ointment, all over Jesus' feet. And that smell fills the air. And then there's a sight. The sight of the guest of honor is now dominated by this woman at his feet, wiping his feet with her tears and her hair. What's going on? All of a sudden, this human room that we're all very used to is not a room that we're used to. Something shocking going on in the middle of it. Every rule is being broken. Don't make a scene. Fail. Don't approach the guest of honor without being invited. Fail. Don't show too much emotion in public. Fail. The woman seemingly has got no regard for the rest of the guests. She's not interested in them or her host. She's just made a direct line for Jesus, and she's caused this scandalous scene. We're given Simon's take on it. Jesus sees into his mind and knows what he's thinking. And that means Jesus can tell his disciples what he was thinking, and that means Luke can find out and tell us what Simon is thinking. Simon is unsure why Jesus is even allowing her to do this to him. Surely you know what this looks like. Surely you know who this is. He can't be the sort of man I thought he was. He can't be a prophet. If he was a prophet, he'd know who was touching him. Doesn't he have any shame? Remember, he's an influencer. And so no doubt the way he is thinking, the way his mind is operating, means that's the way everyone else is thinking. The hot takes that he's got set the tone for the culture. His opinions are likely to be the opinions of the room. If his face is showing outrage and disgust, no doubt that face has been replicated around the room. The whole room, that is, except for Jesus. Jesus has a very different take about what's going on, and he now explains that. We're going to move from a human room to a divine perspective. When I use the word divine, it's just another word for God, another word for heaven, where God lives. A divine perspective. This is how we look at a room like this. This is how we look at a scene like this. It's scandalous. It's terrible. It's not good. A woman like that shouldn't be near a man like that. And a man like that should never be caught anywhere near a woman like that. That's how we see it. We judge it quickly. We say no and we want to leave. But heaven, God is looking at this scene very differently. Jesus tells a story. He tells a story that seems to have nothing to do with what's going on. We can only assume that Jesus, in fact, telling this story as the lady continues to do all of this to his feet. Before he tells the story, he calls Simon to attention. Simon's been thinking, hasn't he? If this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is who is touching him. And Jesus tells a parable. Jesus invents a story with some characters in it to teach Simon and the people a lesson. It's a story about two men. Both of those men are in debt, and both of those find their debt unpayable. One man's debt is much bigger than the other. It's perhaps a little hard for us to work out quite how much debt it is, but a denarii was about a day's wage, about a day's salary. So one's down 500 and one is down 50. Both of them, though, have their debts cancelled, and Jesus asks the very straightforward question, which of those two individuals, the one who's had the less cancelled or the more, loves more? And Simon gets the answer right. The one who's been let off the greatest debt is going to love more. And Jesus is saying to Simon, you've misunderstood everything that's going on in front of you. This scene that you think you've worked out, you've got wrong. What she's been displaying, what she's been doing is not scandalous sin, but lavish love. She loves me, Simon. And she loves because she knows who I am. We need to stop and pause a moment because something can be easily missed. As Jesus told this story, it's quite easy and obvious for us to pair up the two men who are in debt. There's one who's got a limited amount of debt, and that's Simon. He's the more respectable person. He's sinned less than the other lady. Yeah, so he's got less debt in the story. And then the other person is the one with more debt, the more obvious sinner, the one who's done more sin, caused more trouble and problems. That's clearly the woman. But who's Jesus in the story? Jesus is the one who cancels the debt. Because Jesus is the one to whom the love and the gratitude is being shown. Jesus put himself at the very center of the story. Luke makes that very clear at the end, because people are aghast that this man is forgiving sins. Jesus is making an astonishing claim then as he tells this very simple story. Jesus is saying, who has come to your house, Simon? The living God has come to your house. And how have you greeted him? And how have you welcomed him? Who has come to your house, Simon? The God who forgives sins. The only one who forgives sins is now in your house. And how have you greeted him, Simon? And how have you treated him? Notice Jesus puts himself as the moneylender, the one who is owed the debt. Does the penny drop for Simon? Jesus has to make it explicit. Just in case the point isn't that clear, Jesus applies it to Simon. Do you see this woman? You can imagine Simon, if the penny hasn't dropped, of course I see this woman. She's the problem. She's the one who's ruining my party. Of course I see her. I wish I couldn't see her, but I do see her. Well, Jesus now uses this woman in her actions that have so scandalized Simon to show Simon what's really going on in her heart and what should have been going on in his heart. I entered your house. You gave me no water for my feet. A basic custom, a basic politeness. You gave me no water for my feet so I could wash my own feet. I come into your house. You were showing me hospitality. You've invited me here, and you've not shown me the basic courtesy. You've given me a bucket so I can wash my feet. But she has wet my feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. Can you see that the lack of Simon has been met by this woman? The lack of love by Simon has been met by the huge, lavish love of this woman. No bucket to hand. It's not her house. Well, it's not going to stop her. The tears, the genuine emotion and devotion that she has are being shown to Jesus, and they're meeting that physical need. You gave me no kiss, no greeting. Don't know how many of you got it. There's a couple of hugs on the way in from I forget what team you're in. Grace? You forget what team you're in. From Rachel and Joe's team. You're still Joy. Hope is gone. Joy's still here. There were a couple of hugs from Team Joy on the way in. I didn't see any kisses. There were a couple of kisses. All right, okay. One or two kisses. Someone was favoured. They had a couple of kisses. Okay, but here, in this culture, it would have been normal etiquette to greet a guest with a kiss. It's not happened. But from the time I came in, she has not stopped to kiss my feet. His lack and her lavish love. You see, she was the scandalous one, and Jesus is turning it, isn't he? She is the one that we should all be ashamed of, and now who's sitting in the seat of shame? The Pharisee, the religious one. And Jesus is saying, you lack. You lack what she's got. You need to learn from this woman. She has not ceased to kiss my feet. You didn't kiss me once. She hasn't stopped. You didn't kiss my face. You didn't greet me in the normal way. She's showing adoration to the lowliest part of my body. You did not anoint my head with oil. A basic welcome. A basic pouring. But she has anointed my feet with ointment. She's brought something precious. She's displaying her love for me. She's making it obvious and clear. This woman who Simon was ready to throw out of his gathering is now the object lesson. This is not a sinful woman behaving in a sensual way, making Jesus complicit in her sinful behavior. No, the picture's different. Heaven sees it differently, understands it differently. How God sees this, how Jesus sees this, is this a woman forgiven? This is a woman who knows forgiveness. She was a different type of woman before, and she's been transformed, she's been made new, she's been washed clean. And in response to that, she is pouring herself out in selfless devotion. She's anointing him, she's blessing him, she's loving him. She's not letting a moment go without him knowing that she loves him. She loves him with every penny in her bank account. She loves him with every part of her body, with her hair and with her tears. She loves him from the very bottom of her heart. She loves him, and she doesn't care what the world thinks of that love. She loves him. Therefore I tell you, her sins, which are many, are forgiven, for she loved much. But he who was forgiven little loves little. Look, Simon, look how she's received me in your house. Who is most taken that God is a God who saves sinners, and that God has come close, so close that he's in your house? Who's most excited about that? That the forgiving, gracious, merciful God has come near, has made himself present with you. Is it you, Simon? Are you most excited about that? Or is it her? Who has got their religious etiquette right? Simon, you're the religious expert. You're the influencer. You're the everyone who's looking at. You're the one who's got the smart suit on, knows how to behave in church. You're respectable. Or is it her, the prostitute? She's seen me for who I really am. She's welcomed me. She's washed my feet. She's anointed me. This parable of Jesus brought a divine, a heavenly perspective. It's brought God's view on proceedings. And see how differently God sees humanity to us. Activity that looks so scandalous, the person that looks so disreputable, Jesus is elevating and lifting up. She's got it right, and you've all got it wrong. The real scandal was that Simon had not treated Christ better. And so, having looked at the room and having seen the heaven's perspective, we now need to come back into this room. We started off talking about a doctor, and I'm going to finish talking about a thermometer. I want you to pretend that this pencil is a thermometer, and I'm going to place it into your mouth. I'm going to place it into your mouth as a route to your soul. I want this to be a spiritual thermometer as we start a new term. I want you to take your own temperature. How is the thermometer of your heart? Are you more like Simon or more like this woman? Is there emotion in your worship? Is there love? Is there a passionate love for Jesus? Is there devotion? Unlike Jesus, I can't see into your mind. I can't see into your heart. I can't necessarily see devotion. Some things we do simply out of routine and pattern and habit. Occasionally, from where I stand, I see some emotion. But God alone knows your heart. How is it with you? And take a moment now as the sermon slows down a bit. And place that thermometer into your heart. Be honest before God. How is your love for him? Notice how she shows her love for Jesus above everything else. There isn't a greater love in her life. It's obvious who's number one. Notice how she personally adores him. This isn't a simple tick box exercise. This isn't a mere religious expression. This is personal devotion. Notice how she humbly serves him. She's at his feet. She takes the lowest place, the lowest position, and she's glad to be there. Notice how she lavishly blesses him. Nothing is too expensive for him. Do you lack love because you don't know how much you've been forgiven? Wonder if Simon put a thermometer in his mouth that evening. Wonder if he tested his own soul. Why don't I love as much? Have I been forgiven? Both of those had debts cancelled, didn't they? Both of them in the story couldn't pay. Simon, though his sins are different, though his sins aren't as obvious, his sins are deep still. He needs those sins cancelled. He needs himself to be forgiven. Both were unable to meet the requirement, and the Bible makes clear that's all of us, everyone in this room. We're all on the same sorry level. And that doesn't quite mean that all sin is the same. But it does mean that every one of us is a sinner, and one sin is enough for us to fall short from the glory of God. So from the heavenly perspective, we're all in the same boat. We can see all of these different levels. And God knows them much better than we do. But God sees a great mass of humanity that is in rebellion against him. We have a debt before the eternal God we cannot pay. But that debt has been paid. The grace of God is the offer of forgiveness, of that debt being cancelled, of a great transfer happening where our debt is exchanged with another. How does this moneylender cancel debt? Well, he takes the hit himself, doesn't he? He bears a loss. He's owed 50. He's owed 500. By cancelling that debt, he now lacks that money that's his. He's giving it up. He's filling the void. And that's what God does in Christ. He meets the gap. He fills the gap. He pays the debt. The debt is cancelled by Christ paying the price. Notice the key words at the end of the passage, easy to miss. Christ points us to her faith. And then to go in peace. He said to the woman, your faith has saved you. Go in peace. Faith is what connects us to Christ's work. Christ pays the price. He dies and is resurrected again. He defeats sin and the enemies that we can't defeat. He pays the debt that we cannot pay. And then faith is an open hand that receives that gift from God. Faith grabs hold of it. Grabs hold of Jesus, the one and only. A bit like that lady grabbed hold of him and worshipped him and adored him. That's faith. And she receives peace. She has peace with God. That thermometer has been in your mouth for a minute or so. How is it with you? Look again at your sin. Look what it means to be a rebel against a holy God. Look again at the mercy of God and his patience. Look again at Jesus, at his life, at his love, at his death, his agonizing death, his terrible death, that you might be forgiven. Look to him and ask the Lord to set your heart aflame with passionate love and devotion for your Savior. Lord, give me a heart like this woman. I may not have the sin CV that she's got, but I've got my own sins, and I've got my own issues, and I've got my own problems, my own battles, and my own fight. I bring that sin before you and ask you to forgive me. And give me a passion like hers. Give me a love like hers. For he's given you in the gospel what you could never earn. Forgiveness. There's no need to walk around with guilt anymore. You can take it to God and have that guilt dealt with. And know peace with God forever. Amen.